Forbes Books presents Leading What Matters Most, the podcast that helps you change behaviors, improve performance, and unlock the potential of your people. Here's Phil Geldart.
I'm back with Victoria Russell. Victoria has had a really accomplished career of more than 20 years, during which time she's led diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's led crisis management, brand reputation, marketing, data and insights, community engagement. She's done a lot of things. So it can bring us a lot of value as we begin to think a little bit about culture. In part one of our discussion, Victoria and I explored diversity, equity, and inclusion in depth. But now I would like to shift our focus to corporate culture. Victoria, how do you feel the impact of culture, whether the culture is clearly expressed or not, influences the organization's ability to support a focus on treating people with respect and understanding? And let's also explore what has been your experience in terms of the way in which company values influence culture, and how do those come together to create an environment where this whole initiative can flourish?
I think first it's defining it. I've been in organizations where I may ask, or I might be tasked with, hey, we should speak on a certain topic. Okay, what are our values? And they may direct you to the company's website, right? And you'll read through them and they sound good, but is that our values and who we are? Are they just aspirational? Is it just a mission statement? So really understanding, I think for the organization first, who are you? What do you believe in? What don't you? So that actually helps guide what you speak on and what you don't. So I almost think of, like I used it earlier, what's the personality of the organization? Who are you really? And defining that is step one. Communicating it clearly, I think, is step two. And then you can start to build that culture around it. I think also understanding where pockets of culture in your organization exist. So a lot of times you might think you have a great company culture, and for the most part, that is what people see and experience, but yet it could be different in different pockets of your organization. So, if you are a retail organization, your frontline workers might have a very different culture and experience than those in your corporate setting. Or if you're a manufacturing organization, what's happening in your plants might be night and day from what you think your corporate culture is. It could be regional. Your different offices might have their own culture inside of it. And so do they ladder up to what's happening? And I think a lot of companies will leverage engagement surveys to kind of understand what's happening, but speaking to your people, keeping a pulse on that, I think is really critical. And then inside of the culture, do different communities experience it differently? So again, you might have this idealistic view of we're inclusive and people can speak up, but if pockets of talent or people could be cultural difference, ethnicity, gender, etc., if they don't feel they can, do you really have the culture you believe? And then being open to, at the end of the day, again, I go back to this, not rose coloring what you want it to be or what you believe it to be, but what is it really? And being able to empower, and I think CEOs can do this, ELT teams can do this. Do you empower the courageous few in your organization that I will call the truth tellers? The ones that will tell you what's really happening, how things really feel. But you have to be careful that those feelings are not dismissed, pushed aside, because you will start to have those people not share with you. And that phrase often you'll hear about, right? The canary in the mine. When the canaries stop singing, you're in trouble, right? And watching who starts leaving. And I've always been one inside, I wouldn't say always, but over the last, say, 7 years, I've definitely become one that's more vocal. I'm a truth teller. I'll be honest and say it like it is. And it's either valued or it's not. And I want to be at places, where it is, and that I can be my whole true self, obviously with tact and being professional, right? But, where you can be honest about what's really going on, and do the leaders really listen? And so I think there's a lot of times I saw that happen with Albert a lot. He had a lot of employees that felt comfortable and safe sharing with him. Marvin Ellis, CEO of Lowe's, he talked about that, where all the employees in his organization have his email address. Now, his HR team and leaders don't love that he does that, right? They're a huge organization. But it lets employees know they have a direct line to him. And I love what he said. It holds leaders accountable that he's going to know what employees are saying. So whatever leaders are telling him, he can go gut check that, right? And so That takes a lot of courage as a leader to be someone that's going to be open to your employees and letting them be direct with you and not have fear of consequences or retaliation, right? That they have that safe space to be transparent and honest.
One of the things that I think is very important is that those kinds of behaviors need to be taught, then they need to be encouraged, and they need to be required, because they may be at the senior level, though they may be the kinds of things that the organization wants to see. But when you're working in a factory 4,000 miles away, you may be not quite so aligned to that type of thinking. So to get the ability to speak truth to the leader, the ability to demonstrate courage of your convictions, these need to become part of the way in which we as a company operate. And I think that then leads to, okay, so we need to equip you. We need to define for you that these are the things that we value. These are the ways in which we do it. And then you need to equip your leaders to be able to respond when people do have the courage to speak up and they do share what they have to. Okay, the leader goes, okay, now what do I do with that?
Exactly.
Then you have to, you have to be able to carry that all the way through. Otherwise, it
words.
dies stillborn. Yeah, it's just words. Yeah.
Because at first I'll see employees get excited. They want to share. They'll keep sharing.
Yeah.
But up to a point, right? If employees do not see impact and action from their words, and they feel like, you're not listening, they're going to stop sharing. And eventually they'll leave the organization, and you'll say you don't know why when it's really right in front of you, right?
Yeah. I do not think it's something you just speak into being. I think it's something you have to equip your organization with the skills and the mindset and the behaviors to know how to do it and how to cope with it. So
absolutely.
Victoria, how have you seen cultures change over the last few years? Clearly, there was a monumental shift a few years ago when we saw all the tragedies going on. But in today's world, how are you seeing cultures changing? Are they moving as quickly, do you think, in the right direction? Or do you see them slipping back a little bit?
I see things slipping back a little bit. I think with the recent affirmative action decision, all the things happening in the political environment, things happening in the global environment, I think I've seen some companies that were committed, are sticking to that. Many are doubling down. I just recently went to a conference, AdColor, phenomenal organization, that talked about doubling up and doubling down. Like, some companies are going to be courageous and do that. And then there are those that I think jumped on the bandwagon, right, to do it because they felt they had to. Maybe employees, they felt a little pressure from employees, and they're using this as an opportunity to walk back those commitments, right, that they might have stated. And I think there's a group in the middle that they're unsure. They don't know what's coming in 2024 and, what new rulings or laws might come forward. What do you do? And so again, that goes back to building that skill set for leaders, what to do when you don't know what to do. Again, I think it's sticking to, if you're committed, you said you're in, walking the talk, knowing what that means, and sticking to that and making sure your leaders feel like they're doing that, holding yourselves accountable to the things you said, right? So that it's not just words on paper and PowerPoint decks, right? And things that you might say at town halls, but like, are you living that day to day? Are leaders living that? And as you said earlier, Phil, who are they being held accountable? Is there consequences of not doing it inside your organization, right? So if you have various leaders that are kind of walking back commitments, but the company's still committed, what are the consequences for that? Maybe it's fear and there's more support that's necessary. It could be more trainings that are necessary, or it could be, maybe this is not the right leaders for the organization that you're trying to build going forward. And I think that takes a lot of courage from leadership teams, that if these traits and behaviors of truly inclusive leaders aren't being lived, does that show up in their performance review? Does that show up in their assessments? Does that show up in how they're bonused at the end of the year, right? So does it truly matter? Or again, is it just something I said, it sounds good, and we're moving on? So I think we are seeing that shift. I think the D&I space is seeing a lot of kind of turnover for sure in that space, a lot of exhaustion. Like I said earlier, it is an exhausting space to work in. But if it doesn't continue to evolve, I do worry, does it dissolve? Will it stay sustainable? And so what does that really mean for your organization? I think it's important for companies to really start to reevaluate that. Does it expand beyond traditional legal, compliance, or HR work? How does it show up outside of your organization? I think a lot of companies fall into this space that D&I is an internal thing. And I hear that a lot. It's both. It's both internal and external. It's how it shows up in the culture inside your brand, and it's how it shows up in your brands in the external culture of community, of people, of your consumers. Those both have to be very important. I've seen companies, and I won't name any, but I've seen brands where I've seen it show up beautifully in their external work and marketing, but it wasn't authentic to how the organization actually operated day to day. And at some point, I saw in this particular example, employees began to call that out. I've also seen where it works and they're doing great work internally, but the external representation of the company or its brands is not connecting. And so that can hurt your ability to attract talent. So I've always thought of, at least when I was building D&I strategies, the 3 pillars I would look at is, one around your people, your talent, all of that work. What's the culture of your organization? And then the external piece around the marketplace. Because if people externally cannot see that you're walking the talk, living your values and your products, your brands, and your talent, how does that help you attract talent? So if you're saying we want to be more diverse, but we're not, and you'll hear companies say, I can't find the talent. They're not out there. That's not true. Are you casting a wide enough net? Are you attractive to diverse talent, right? If I'm looking at, a couple of options of places to work and I look through your website and your branding and your products and I don't see myself represented, I may not feel that's a company for me. So I think connecting all of that is really important for the cycle of talent and for your brands as well for consumers.
And I know you have a marketing background, so you're able to bring that view in. I think I would extrapolate that, not to disagree, I would agree very much, but I would extrapolate to say that it's almost where, if you think about 30% of the workforce will certainly be at some point the Gen Z coming in. I think you look at the youth coming in, you're almost seeing a shift from a work-life balance to a work-life integration.
Yes.
Where the way I live at work and the way I live at home, I'm expecting them to be kind of the same. So that is starting to impact the culture. And I must say, I picked up that phrase from chatting with you earlier, the concept of work-life integration, because I felt that was very profound. So just explain a little bit more on what you meant by that. There's not such a gap anymore between how I think about society at work and at home.
Yes, I had the honor of meeting Braven Solomon, who does a lot of trainings and has written books on this topic of generational differences. And she talked about how from generation to generation, what we're learning from our parents, the things we want to emulate, the things we don't, right? And how that continues to evolve over time. And at some point, there were generations that lived to work, and now there are people who are working to live. And as that evolves, like when I think about the balance I want to have in my life, I want to be the same person day to day that I am at work. I want to enjoy what I do, but I don't want that to be who I am, right? And how do I do both? How do I still have an emphasis on my family, on my friends, other passions that I might have? Like I'm, as you mentioned earlier, I'm very involved in my community. I want to serve on boards. I want to give back. Like, how do I do all of those things and have them integrated? Because I think 2020 and COVID forced us into an integration that probably was going to evolve at some point anyway, but it kind of sat us down and did it a bit quicker. You saw families and colleagues have to integrate. How do I balance my family now with work and at home and the office, right? And we're going to see, how does that continue to evolve over time now? And then you introduce AI. What is that going to do for the workplace over time? And what does that mean to be in the office or out of the office? I think it is so critical for organizations not to think, okay, we're going to go back to the way it was. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think that ever happens, that you'll ever revert back to the way things were. How do you evolve in that and continue to thrive in that and ensure that you're this new way of working and how employees want to experience the workplace and their life? Is that cohesive? And I think younger generations, it's becoming more and more important because they maybe saw their parents work and work and work and work. I heard a quote recently, nobody will remember that you stayed late at work except for maybe your children, right? And your spouse. So how do you start to make sure that you can still have a fulfilling career, still be productive, still feel like you're contributing, but that your life is just as important. And I think you're seeing companies having to step into those spaces in terms of social impact work, like the things that really matter to other generations, and that they're playing a role in that as well. And so I think all of that we're starting to see kind of mesh together. And so for me, I want to do both. I want to have my life and work, and the beautiful blend is when they almost become one and the same for me. There are times that I've said, people would say, are you working? Or are you traveling and having fun? And I'm like, both. And the fact that you can't tell, that's fantastic. That I have somehow, enjoy what I do for a living so much that you're not sure which it is. Great. Like that to me is ideal, because I really like what I do. And I love the people I work with and have had the opportunity to work with. And I look forward to what the future holds for me. And I just hope I will always enjoy what I do for a living, or maybe that's not what I should do, and I think you'll see more generations do that.
I think if someone were to listen to this, they might say, wow, this being a leader is really hard. There's a lot of things I've got to be mindful of. I have to watch the older generation, the newer generation, what people are thinking. I've got to think about society. I'm supposed to get, in the meantime, I got to get product out the door. But I would say that it's actually not that hard. It comes down to listen to what your people are saying. If you're just willing to listen to what your team is saying to you, you don't have to act on everything they say, but you need to be aware of it. And then you need to choose. They will tell you what's important. If you have an attitude of, I'm willing to hear what you have to say, I'm opening the door for it, I want to hear, and then as the leader, I'll decide what to do with it. But it makes leadership a lot simpler. There's not a lot of things you've got to remember. If you can just remember that the person that you're leading has got tremendous potential and great worth, and what do they have to say? And what are you going to do with what they say? You probably could deal with a lot of the issues that we've been chatting about today.
Absolutely. If I could sum that up in one word, it would just be empathy.
Empathy.
Do you have empathy for the people around you? Do you genuinely care and listen and put yourself in their shoes? And I think if more leaders could just do that. And then something I began doing, I would say around the time where my career really evolved at Papa John's from marketing into D&I and everything that was going on, that for me to create or work to create an environment and a culture where people could bring their whole selves to work, I first had to do that myself. And so I kind of went through this process of really figuring out, who is Victoria? How do I want to show up that is authentic to me, that I don't have to second guess and do the mental gymnastics of, do I show up this way in one place and this way someplace else? I just want to be me and all that I am. And some people will love it, some people won't. And I'm okay with that. And so I learned that once I was able to truly be who I am, others felt comfortable and vulnerable enough to be who they are in my presence and around me. And I remember when I first joined Beam Suntory, I got a lot of feedback from leaders and employees that people felt like they could come and just talk to me, that I was just one of the people, right? Versus, people getting caught up in titles and position and things like that, that at the end of the day, just be who you are. And one thing I've always embraced about my career, and I love my career over time, while I was at Papa John's, actually was a bartender and a server on the side. And it helped me see two dimensions I saw of my personality and things I like. So by day, I was very nerdy, analytical. I was writing SQL code and things like that. But I'm a very outgoing, extroverted person. And so when I would bartend and serve, I got to be with people and fun environments. And I think that's when I fell in love with the spirits industry. It's just a fun, happy place, right? That brings people together. And so when I joined, being one of the comments in my announcement, and I had a friend say, you really wanted that in there, was that I was a bartender. Yes. And I was like, I used to name cocktails after myself, the Victoria's Secret, that I still, still love. And so, yes, and I've just learned to embrace all the dimensions of who I am that makes me uniquely me. And I love that. And so I never have to play a role. I don't have to be a professional version of me at work and then the fun version of me outside of work. I can just be me. I think that's when people say they want to bring their whole full selves, that's what we mean. We just want to be who we are and not have to wear a mask, or there's the phrase called covering. Everybody does it. Some communities do it at a higher level, but where you feel you have to cover dimensions of yourself to protect yourself in the workplace, so you don't let everybody really see who you are. But when you're doing those mental gymnastics of hiding dimensions of who you are, you're not your best self. You're not bringing your full potential to your job and executing your role at the highest quality, because you're always in your head. If you're in a meeting, you're thinking, okay, should I say this? Well, how should I say it? When should I say it? Versus just being able to embrace who you are, right? And then in that culture you're building in your organization as a leader, do you give grace? Maybe the employee says it, but maybe it's not the best way to articulate something, right? How do we extend grace to each other that it's a safe space to make mistakes or say something wrong? Oops, right? Call me in, not out, right? Let me know that I made a misstep and tell me, how should I have said this or done something differently so that I can learn for the next time? And I think if we would extend more empathy and grace to one another, it would be a completely different culture in the office and outside the office. I really think it expands right to everywhere of who we are, but it obviously plays a very critical role in the workplace.
Well put. Well, Victoria, this has been spectacular. I appreciate your time as well as your insight and wisdom. Very, very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And that will do it for this episode of Leading What Matters Most. Please make sure to leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any future episodes. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.
This has been Leading What Matters Most with Phil Geldart. If you want to create a culture that drives performance and develop leaders that inspire and motivate, go to philgeldart.com. Leading What Matters Most is a production of Forbes Books.